Hey, good morning. Welcome back to GP Outdoors. I'm going to take another crack at sharpening the chain on this 261. You probably recall a couple of weeks back I did that video when I had an off day and I thought I had sharpened this chain. Came to realize that my 2-in-1 had dull files in it and I spun the round ones. However, when I felt those two dead standing down around the corner on my driveway last week, got a helpful note or comment from a longtime subscriber. And that made me realize that I hadn't solved the problem yet. So today we're going to take another crack at it. Nice thing about it is he's been with the channel a long time, like so many of you. And like so many of you, he always gives me some great, helpful advice. He's the kind of subscriber, he doesn't comment too often, but whenever he does, it's usually when I'm doing something with a chainsaw. And it's always a positive, supportive comment with some good advice. And I've learned to trust him over the years because every time he tells me something, it turns out he's right. For example, he'll watch a video, leave me a comment and say, "Great video, GP, but I could tell your chain wasn't sharp." And then I'll check it out. Sure enough, he's right. Or he'll say, "I was watching the video and it looks like your chain is way too tight. Loosen it up." And he's right again. I'll grab that chain and it'll be like pulling on a piano string. This time, he was watching that video where I was dropping the dead standing. He told me, "GP, your cutters are nice and sharp, but your rakers are way too high." And sure enough, I think he's right again. Let's go back to the 2-in-1. You may recall on that second last video, and I'll put a link up above me, I realized that the round files on this 2-in-1 were dull. And that's because every once in a while, you have to try to pull them out a bit and turn them around because otherwise you end up flattening on one side. I also noticed, and I don't know if you can see this, that the round files are not held still or static. They actually spin on their own. The flat file in the middle, which is this guy here, it's one two-sided file, and that's for doing the rakers. There's no flip in this one. Once it's worn out, it's worn out. And after I read his comments and took a look, I can clearly see that flat file is worn right down on both sides. So, I dropped by to see Ron at the chainsaw clinic, and I bought myself a raker gauge. I've never used one before. So I'm going to try it out because I also bought myself a couple of hand files. And I'm going to try to file these down by hand, just the rakers, and then head out and see if it makes any difference. However, first, I'm going to use the 2-in-1 just to sharpen up the cutters because I haven't sharpened them since I did that job last week. And then we'll try working on the rakers. I know that we've got a lot of folks that are similar to myself. You haven't had property for a long time or you're fairly new to chainsaws. And every once in a while, probably like me, you do something that's a little embarrassing or you or things you just don't want anybody to know you did. And you look back later and you laugh about it. And I've got a few of those stories myself. Like for example, I can never figure out, there we go, which way that goes. I may have mentioned this a while back on the channel, but I'd never once touched a chainsaw in my life until about 10, 11 years ago. It's the very first time I ever touched, used, or purchased a chainsaw. All kind of happened at the same time. And the reason why is because I had just bought this property. And I very quickly found out that there was more to maintaining a forested property than I ever imagined. That kind of came in the form of finding out on a very regular basis when I drove in from the concession road that I'd come across a tree down across the driveway. And of course I had no chainsaw. So I spent a lot of time fighting with an axe, trying to cut it up, throwing a chain around it and using the truck to try to drag it out of the way so I could get into the cottage. Didn't take me long to realize I had to buy a chainsaw. But I didn't know a thing about it. And I mean not a thing. So I did what I do with anything else. Went on the internet, found a whole bunch of chainsaws, compared pricing, didn't know what else to compare. Didn't know STIHL versus Husky versus Echo or anything else. And of course I just found the best deal, or what I thought was the best value. Turned out it was a home and garden saw. True story. Had a 16-inch bar on it. Pretty happy I had one because I just thought I had a chainsaw. Didn't work very well. Hard starting quite often, but at the end of the day, I had a saw for a while. The embarrassing part. I was using that saw for a little while, and I started to notice over time that it was getting harder and harder to block wood. And I didn't know why. I thought the saw was defective. It wasn't that great a saw. I won't tell you the name of it at this point, but it wasn't a great saw. But either way, I assumed over time that it was broken, because I got to a point where no matter how hard I tried or how hard I forced the bar, it wouldn't cut wood. It just wouldn't. So I figured it was broken. So finally, I was going to take it back to the big box store where I bought it. And I happened to be talking to somebody down the concession road, and I happened to mention that I wasn't happy with this chainsaw. It used to cut pretty good, and now it doesn't cut at all. The gentleman asked me when the last time I sharpened the chain was. And of course, I kind of looked at him like a deer in the headlights, and I went, "Sharpen? What do you mean sharpen?" True story. I had no idea. He kind of laughed a little bit, explained to me that I had to sharpen the chain, asked me if I had files, and of course this is all totally alien to me. But that's how little outdoor experience I had back then. At the end of the day, I ended up taking the saw back into the saw shop, and I paid them to sharpen the chain for me because of course I didn't have a clue how to do it, but every once in a while he brings it up. Okay, so I've sharpened all the cutters, or at least the best I can with the 2-in-1. And now I'm going to use this raker gauge and a flat file. And I'm just going to take a look at each one of the rakers just to see if they are in fact too high or if they're uneven. And then I want to take it out and see if it's going to cut or eat the wood a lot better than it did last week. Another interesting fact I've probably never told you good folks is that despite how many years I've been using a chainsaw, I've actually never ever learned how to use flat files and round files. Never. For that first little while, I would take them into the chainsaw shop, and then after I met neighbor Guy, he used to sharpen them for me. Now, don't get me wrong, you know Guy, he's always willing to show you or teach you how to do something, but every time he asked, I figured, oh, well, you're doing it. I could learn another time. And I never actually ever learned because neighbor Guy, as you probably noticed, has one of these fancy grinders. So he just sets it up to the right chain, runs the chain through it, and whenever he was doing it, he'd just come over or give me a call and ask me if I wanted to bring my chains over. And then at some point, the STIHL 2-in-1 came out, and once I got a hold of that, I've been using that ever since. So I guess what I'm saying is that I've never learned how to use these files, and so I picked up a set because I want to try to learn this summer. I really love being out in the forest, playing with these chainsaws and firewood, and it's just become quite an interest and a hobby of mine now. So what I'm hoping to do is to spend some time learning how to do it properly and on my own. In fact, I'm not even sure I'm doing this correctly. But I do know that Buck and Billy Ray Smith has some great videos and how-to videos on how to sharpen your saw properly or your saw chain. So I've been watching a lot of those lately. And I think that'll be very helpful. Okay, well that's all of them. In all honesty, most of the rakers were at or below this gauge level, assuming I've been doing this correctly, because I've never done it before. There was only 1 or 2, maybe 3 that were a little bit higher, so I've filed those down and I think they're all pretty consistent. So I want to head out to the woodshed, grab a log, and I just want to see if I can bite into it and see if there's any difference between what I felt last week and how she runs today. Oh, and one other thing. I'm trying to learn how to use this stuff. I've got this raker gauge, and I noticed that there's all these angles cut on different sides of it. I cannot find a YouTube video anywhere that describes or explains what each one of these is, but clearly they must be there for a reason. If you folks know of any reference that would explain what these markings or these angle markings are, I'd greatly appreciate it if you'd leave it in the comments below. Thanks. I forgot my log ox. Well, she's definitely sharp, no question, and it's working great, very effectively. I've learned over the last couple of years with this 261, when it's properly sharpened, it almost pulls itself through the log. You're basically just fingertip control pivoting it. It otherwise does the work itself. Was there a big difference between last week with those dead standing and today? If there was, it was negligible. It ran pretty good last week. I did notice I had to push a little bit once in a while, or not. I had to push a little more than I normally do. And today, as I said, it just bit right in. I don't know if, you know, having 3 or 4 rakers a little higher than the rest would make that big a difference. Maybe you can let me know in the comments. In all fairness to the 2-in-1, most every one of those rakers was at the same height. Regardless, I think after 3 or 4 seasons now, it's not that expensive. I'm going to grab some new files and replace them in the 2-in-1. And as I mentioned to you good folks, this summer I'm going to learn how to do it myself by hand. So hey, thanks for sticking around, and thanks to you good subscribers that help me out with advice from time to time. If you noticed I was doing this wrong today, I'd greatly appreciate it if you let me know in the comments. And I'm watching a lot of Buck and Billy Ray Smith to try to learn how to get the gullet and those kind of things. But if there are other videos that you think are excellent tutorials on how to properly hand sharpen your chains, please leave them in the comments. I'd greatly appreciate it. And hey, next time as you're learning to use that chainsaw or the tractor or anything else, and you do something that you're kind of embarrassed about, just think of those stories I told you. Hopefully it'll make you feel better. We all got those stories. Have a great week with your families. Please be kind to each other, and I'll see you again on the next one. I'm Gord Potter, and you've been watching GP Outdoors. Cheers.